Hi, I'm Elizabeth, this is the Bookish North, and today I'm here to wrap up Space Opera September. I will of course leave all the relevant links down in the description box below. And something amazing happened this month. For the first time ever, I managed to finish all challenges in a readathon, and I feel so accomplished. I don't know what I'm doing. Anyways, this readathon had both ranks and challenges. Ranks you gained by the amount of books you read, from 1, 2, 3 to 4. I managed to read 5 books during this readathon, so I capped out on ranks and achieved the top rank. And then there were 2 career paths you could do. You could do the sort of Alliance way, which would take you up to Fleet Captain, or you could go the Rebel track, which would take you up to Space Pirate. And, you know, I wanted to be a Space Pirate because who wouldn't? So, yeah, I did complete Challenge 2B, as it was called, that would set you out on the Rebel track. And that was to read a book by a diverse author featuring diverse characters. I read Hexarchate stories by Yoon, which ticks off several diversity boxes. I'm not going to go into all of that, but it certainly fits. This is a book in the same universe as the Machineries of Empire trilogy written by Yoon that starts off with the book Nine Fox Gambit. I have read and loved the trilogy, and I wanted to read this. This is short fiction set in the same universe. There's flash fiction, there are some short stories, and there is one full-length novella in here. And the novella takes place 2 years after the events of the trilogy. All of the other stories are sort of prequels or just more background info about the characters in the trilogy. So I would definitely say that this is a book for the ones who have read and loved the trilogy. This is not a starting point, but if you, like me, have enjoyed the trilogy and want to know more about the characters and want to know what happens next after the events of the trilogy is over, I would definitely recommend this book, and I did enjoy reading it. My favorite part of it was the novella in the end. You just progressed the story from the trilogy, and I would very much like even more books from this universe now, because it certainly has built up to more stuff happening in the future. So yeah, would recommend this after having read the trilogy. If you haven't read the trilogy, try out Nine Fox Gambit instead. And that takes me out of to just the rest of the challenges. So the first challenge was to read a novella, and for that I chose To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers, which is about 130 pages, I think. So this is the story all about how no, that's not it. This is a story set in a near future Earth where humans now have the technology to alter the body, and thus making long distance space travel possible, because you can put the body to sleep and it won't be aging as much while it's sleeping. So you can just be in sort of hibernation while traveling. And then they also have the ability to adapt the human body to other living conditions than what we have on Earth, which makes it possible to visit other planets. And in this book, it starts off with a woman, an astronaut, saying that I'm not sure that you on Earth will ever read this or see this, but if you do, there's a question in the end that we would like you to answer, but you should not just skip to the question. To fully understand the meaning of the question, you need to see or read the whole thing being the book. So I did. This is the story about these 4 astronauts that are sent on a mission from Earth. They're going to be away for 80 Earth years, but for them it's going to feel much shorter. They're going to visit 4 planets that has never been visited by humans before, and through the book we just hear about these 4 planets, what they see there, what they experience, what kind of scientific discoveries they are making, and also just about the relationship between these 4 astronauts who are living together in close confinement over a long period of time. And then also how things happening back on Earth also affects these 4 people in space. I had very high hopes for this because I've really loved the 3 books I've read by Becky Chambers before. I have to say I was a bit disappointed because I didn't love this as much. It's not a bad book, it just lacked some of that nerve that made me really feel things in the other books. I think maybe it is sort of the lack of conflict in this. It is very much a description of these planets and a description of the characters, and there is very little conflict until the very end. It doesn't really feel like something is at stake, or I don't know what's at stake until the last like 10 pages or so. And for me that made me less emotionally involved in the story. And even though this is a book that clearly just argues for science for the sake of science and knowledge in itself, which is a message I'm all for, I didn't feel it like I've done with the other of her books. So it was okay, but to me it wasn't having that wow factor that made it into a favorite. But I'm happy to have read it regardless. And then the second challenge was to read at least 2 books by female authors. I've read 3 for this, but one of them fits no other challenges than this one, so I'm going to mention this here. It's Provenance by Leckie, which is another book that is part of a trilogy. It's not, it is sort of a sequel to a trilogy. This follows on in the same universe as the ancillary books. I know that's not the name of the trilogy, I just can't pronounce the name, so I'm going to call them that. But this is set after the events of the ancillary trilogy. It's set in a different planet with a different culture, far away, and it is a completely autonomous story. I feel like this is a much more straightforward sort of adventure story than the trilogy is. It's somewhat less complex and confusing in its world building, but it still has a lot of twists and turns in the plot. In here we follow a young woman who is a foster child, and she and her foster brother has been set up to compete by their mother for all through their lives. They're competing for the title of heir and to inherit her name and position in this world. It is sort of given that the brother is the most capable of the two and that he will have this title, but the woman who is the protagonist of this book can't just quite give up, and when we meet her, she is in the midst of a scheme where she's trying to break someone out of an impenetrable prison to impress her mother. And from the start, her plans fall apart, and she has to continuously think on the go and adapt her plan to events happening around her. And there's a lot of stuff happening. I think this was a fun, fast-paced, plot-driven story. I greatly enjoyed reading it, and I would recommend it. This one you can read without having read the trilogy before, because that is just mentioned as some sort of background info, but it's not important to the story in here. And I don't think you would be too spoiled for the trilogy if you read this first. There are some spoilers, but I'm not sure you would pick up on them if you don't know what to look for. So this can definitely be read as a standalone book, and I do recommend that one. I greatly enjoyed it. And then the third challenge is to read a book published before you were born. And for that, I chose Orphans in the Sky by Robert A. Heinlein. This was first written as 2 separate short stories in 1941, but it was published in, I think, 1963 as a complete book. And it's that book that I have read. This one I would not recommend to anyone. I don't think it was good at all. This is a story about a generation ship where the people on the ship have forgotten that they are on a ship entirely until one of the crew members figures this out, and he wants to get everyone together into getting the ship back on track, but it doesn't really go exactly as he wants. I thought this was a poorly plotted book. It's got a lot of cheap solutions, a lot of things just randomly happening because they need to happen to pull the story forwards. And on top of that, it is sexist to boot, and yeah, I did not like this at all. But I will, however, try some other Heinlein in the future, because I think it's probably not fair to judge him by this very early work of his. So I think some of his later works and more famous works might suit me better than that one. And then finally, the last challenge was to read a book over 500 pages. And this is where I think I might have cheated just a little. I mean, I have read a book, it is over 500 pages. It's the third book in here written by a woman. I'm just not quite sure this counts as space opera, but I am going to count it anyways. It is The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal. So this is an alternate history book, and it definitely involves space travel. It's just most of the book is set on Earth. So this is set in the US in 1952, when a meteor crashes into Earth on the coast outside of Washington DC, and it obliterates Washington DC. It kills off hundreds of thousands of people, and it also initiates changes to the climate that will make the planet uninhabitable to human beings within the span of the lifetime of the people of this book. So that sort of propels the space program forward and makes it more urgent to get into space and to be able to colonize other planets to find a new place to live. And in here we meet Elma York, who is a very capable woman. She is a brilliant mathematician. She's a pilot who flew in the Second World War. She's married to a man called Nathaniel, who is the lead engineer for the US space program and will be for the International Space Program when that gets started. And they are both key personnel in this endeavor to get humans into space. I really enjoyed this. There were several things in here that I really appreciated. One of them is how Elma York is both this very capable person, but she also has some severe problems that she's struggling with. She has severe anxiety when it comes to talking in public and being the center of attention, and it's hindering her in many ways. But she is also a very driven person, and she desperately wants to be an astronaut, which is not easy because this is the 1950s and that's not considered a job for a woman. So I enjoyed that you get a person who has severe flaws in her characters, but still really wants to work towards something of her ambition. And the other thing in here that I really liked was that the relationship between her and her husband, Nathaniel, was a very good relationship. They didn't have really any problems, and any kind of obstacles and conflict that needed to be in the book to drive the story forward were never centered around them. And I feel like that's a rare thing in a novel, that you manage to have just this sound, perfect relationship in the midst of it. And you could argue that this relationship is probably a bit too perfect to feel true, because Nathaniel is just this extremely supportive husband. Whatever she's doing, he's there to support her, and they never argue about anything, they never disagree about anything. They seem a bit too perfect to be true, but sometimes that's what you want to read, and I enjoy that part of it. It's also some very cheesy sex scenes between these two throughout the book that I felt was maybe a bit out of place in this book. I don't know. Not that they wouldn't have sex, obviously, but it was just, those scenes felt like they were belonged in different books somehow. I don't know. But it was fun. I really enjoyed reading this, and there's a sequel that I will also read. And in fact, I think this book is actually a prequel to a short story or novelette that she had written, so I'm eager to read that as well. But yeah, this definitely has space in the center of the story, and there are people in the book that are going to space. It's about the very start of the space program and the very first people into space, just in this alternate version of history. And there are also nods to other things and people from real life, and a lot of nods to Ray Bradbury in here, stuff like that. So yeah, I really like this book. I felt it was a great, entertaining read. And that concludes my reading for Space Opera September, which came at the perfect time for me. I really needed this kind of reading right now. I was in the mood for some sci-fi, and yeah, the timing was perfect, and I have really enjoyed participating in this, and I'm happy that I have finally found a readathon where I managed to complete all of the prompts. So thank you to Thomas at SFF 180 for organizing this, and I hope it will happen again next year and I will participate again. And until next time, hope you're happy with your reading, and I'll see you next week, hopefully. Bye bye.